people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy.
The undisputed super featherweight champion of the world, Alicia, the Bumgarner.
That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to kick it off with Tim Tszyu's triumphant return to the land down under to Australia, where he faced America's own Joey Spencer in a contest that didn't last very long. Lots of questions ahead of this match. Has Tim Tszyu been irreparably damaged from the losses to Sebastian Fundora? The loss to Murtazaliev. I took it on faith that Tim Tszyu is still good enough to beat a Joey Spencer. Even with what he endured in the previous year, he can beat this guy, he can get over the hump, and that's what he did. Though in the early goings of the fight, the first 2 rounds, he didn't rush in like he did with backrub Murtazaliev. It's the glaring difference between that performance and how it played out and this one, that this time, learning from his mistakes, Tim took his time, had 1 or 2 feel-out rounds before he decided to commit to his power shots. Not a lot happened in the first round, and not a lot happened in the second round. Tim was just feeling the guy out, seeing what he had, so that in the third round, you see him put up a high guard and start to crowd Joey Spencer. Now he's pushing the pace, now he's coming forward, now he's crashing the pocket, but being responsible while he does it. Putting punches together, overpowering Joey, overwhelming Joey. Tim was methodical, taking his time, using his jab, and being responsible while closing the distance so that he could force a corner stoppage in the 4th round. Good to see him back in front of the hometown crowd, all the good people in Newcastle. They got a show. But of course, the success of this rehabilitation effort is not limited to stopping Joey Spencer. I figured he'd be able to beat this guy, but it's going to take a while longer to build Tim back up. Enter Keith Thurman. So what was impressive about Tim yesterday is that he took his time, exhibited some poise, had 1 or 2 feel-out rounds before he started committing to his power shots, and when he did so responsibly from behind a high guard while putting punches together. Great combinations. His variety of punches was also impressive. The hooks, the body shots downstairs, the uppercuts up the middle, finding holes in the guard to get big punches off, as well as counters in the exchange. Was all very good. To respect yourself and what you're trying to do, you have to respect your opponent. You have to take them seriously, even when it's a Joey Spencer. And I think that the mistake that Tim made last year was he didn't respect backrub Murtazaliev. That is, he treated the victory as if it were a foregone conclusion, and it was not. For rushing in and trying to do too much, too soon, too early in the fight, he paid for it. Whereas this time, he was more patient, more methodical, more responsible, and thus more effective. Will Keith Thurman fight him? From the moment that Keith Thurman traveled to Australia and knocked out Brock Jarvis, he's been pretty transparent that he's not committed to this fight, that if a better offer comes along to fight someone in America, he'll take it. The question is, has such an offer come along? Who in America is offering Keith Thurman better money to do something here with someone from over here? Is there someone in America offering Keith Thurman an even better situation, a better arrangement than what a Tim Tszyu fight would offer? Because that's a big fight in Australia. Tim Tszyu versus Keith Thurman will put a lot of asses in a lot of seats.
Talking about a stadium fight.
And a chance to make even more money than what he made knocking out Brock Jarvis. Though it's not without its perils, it's not without risks, but if you want to make big money, there are gonna be big risks, and I always felt that Keith Thurman's decision to follow through with this and take on Tszyu is contingent upon how Tim looks. Remembering that short list of names that Keith Thurman gave immediately after the Brock Jarvis fight, a bunch of guys, most of which are committed to other situations for the entirety of this calendar year, and none of which have made an offer to fight Keith Thurman. I mean, he mentioned Ryan Garcia, of all people, who we all know is spoken for the entirety of this year.
The Tszyu fight at this time is the biggest fight that Keith Thurman could be in. It's the biggest opportunity.
For the biggest money. On the predication that he actually goes through with this, what would this fight look like?
Like the Tony Harrison fight.
What Keith Thurman brings to the table is experience, movement, and some explosiveness, some power, at least enough to knock out a Brock Jarvis. But as stated, Brock Jarvis is a fighter who used to fight as low as 135. He's not a true junior middle like Tszyu.
I don't think he punches anywhere near as hard as Tszyu.
They picked some nice fights for you. Them dudes ain't hungry like me, bro. They're not hungry.
Hungry?
Bro.
You've
They're
been on
not
a vacation for 5 years hungry. What are you talking about, man?
If you take stock of who these fighters have been fighting in the last 2, 3, 4 years, Tszyu's matchmaking has been a lot more ambitious than Keith Thurman's, even though Keith is supposed to be the more experienced fighter in the fight, the former unified champion. But in the last 2 or 3 years, who has he fought?
Mario Barrios coming off a knockout loss to Javante and Brock Jarvis.
Whereas Tszyu, in the last 2 or 3 years, has fought a former U.S. Olympian in Hrgovic, a former champion in Tony Harrison.
Fought Brian Mendoza. After Brian knocked out Sebastian Fundora, he fought Sebastian Fundora. He fought Bakram Murtazaliev. He's won some fights, he's lost some fights, but the matchmaking has been a lot more ambitious than what we've seen from Keith.
Keith only went to Australia because of who it was for. It was for Brock Jarvis, who had already been knocked out in a single round by Liam Paro at 140. So going down there for him at 154, it's no risk at all.
Nope.
For Keith Thurman.
Nope.
It wasn't. Whereas you see, he starts to have all these reservations as soon as it becomes about somebody else. As soon as it becomes about Tszyu, when the Jarvis fight was only intended to be a segue to a Tszyu fight.
Brock Jarvis was just an appetizer. Tszyu is intended to be the main course. And if he goes through with it, I'm saying it now. I think Tim beats him. I think Tszyu will be the first to stop Keith Thurman.
I see through the smoke and mirrors when it comes to Keith. He's a very risk-averse fighter. But if he decides to take on this risk, I think Tim pressures him the same way he pressured Tony Harrison. And I think he gets him out of there. I think he overpowers Keith the same way he overpowered Tony Harrison. For the same reason, you're going to try to fight the fight on the good foot, on the move.
Working off the counter, trying to set a trap, all the while being pushed from one end of the ring to the other.
I think Tim can apply educated pressure, catching and shooting out of the high guard, going to the body, taking Keith's legs away to slow him down, then take him out.
And remember that Keefe doesn't like it to the body. He never has.
Remember that Keefe is a naturally smaller man than Tony Harrison was, than Tszyu is. Remember that Keith is not a true junior middle, and all he's done there is knock out a guy who used to fight at 135.
I like Tszyu to win the fight, and win the fight by way of knockout, if the fight sees the light of day. The question is, will it?
And if it doesn't, what does Tim Tszyu do then? I'll make the recommendation that if Keith Thurman bulks and hauls tail, maybe they can do Tszyu versus Michael Zarafa.
They've got history, they've got some beef. You can always do that fight if Keith Thurman bulks. For now, congratulations to Tszyu for getting back in the winner's bracket, but there is more work that needs doing.
In the men's heavyweight division, we saw unbeaten Richard Torrez take on the very statuesque Guido Vianello in what was an entertaining fight and an acid test for the young Olympian.
It was an entertaining fight from start to finish, and very early on it was established that Guido's going to move and punch. He's going to try to box up Richard Torrez, whereas Richard is going to put the pressure on him and keep him on the ropes for the entirety of the fight, because that's what we saw.
As Richard, the noticeably shorter, stumpier, stockier fighter in the fight, would close the distance, all Guido Vianello could do was hold in the early goings of this fight. As Richard would crash the pocket, Guido resorted to excessive holding to the point where he was deducted a point.
He didn't want to trade with Richard mid-range to inside, having felt the power. He knew that Richard would have the advantage there, so all he could do was smother his work by holding, but that costed him a point.
Mitigating the exchanges and managing the distance for the statuesque Guido Vianello proved difficult because every time he tried for a lead right, Richard would weave under it and come over the top with a counter. He'd counter his right, he'd counter his left.
Star of the show for Richard was the counter right hand over the top. Remember that Richard is a southpaw.
He leads with his right, so whenever Guido would either try for a jab or try for a straight, Richard would either slip and counter or weave and counter over the top, landing the counter right hand, the counter right hook with some regularity. And there was a lot on it because whenever he did land that punch, it moved Guido's entire body.
Power is real.
I'll forgive Richard Torrez for not knocking out Guido Vianello because Guido has proven himself a durable fighter fight by fight. I think he's only ever been stopped once, and it wasn't a cold knockout. He was actually stopped on cuts.
So I'll forgive that Richard didn't put this guy down, but the power to do it, the power to knock him out, it was there because I saw him hurt Guido several times.
There's no question that mid-range to inside, Richard Torrez had the advantage putting together very short and powerful hooks within close quarters. Say it all the time. At close proximity, the shorter, stumpier fighter with the shorter arms tends to have the advantage. And that is what we saw yesterday, as counter hook after counter hook after counter hook consistently landed.
It was a tough test for Richard. He had to battle through some adversity and a cut.
As far as acid tests go, Richard did fairly well. He didn't stop the guy, he didn't knock him out, but he did show some good qualities. Hunkering down, fighting at a slight crouch, bending at the waist and knees, bobbing and weaving under the sweeping hooks and the straight punches.
Countering over the top.
Showing good power, respectable power. If not for Guido's constant movement, I don't think he would have finished this fight on his feet because, as stated, I saw Richard hurt him several times. What I would like to see from Richard moving forward is a bit more refinement, fine-tuning when he's applying pressure, because he is frenzied in the pocket.
Spends so much time trying to get there that once he is, he goes crazy.
It can be so difficult for a shorter, stumpier, stockier fighter to close the distance on a taller fighter that once they get right in front of them, they go nuts. They just let the fists fly. I would like to see a little bit more punch picking from Richard Torrez and fluid combinations in the pocket.
But so far, so good. This was intended to be an acid test for Richard Torrez, a glimpse at what he will have to deal with as he climbs to that upper echelon of heavyweights, where the median height for a fighter is anywhere in between 6'4" to 6'8". Richard had to show that he can deal with that, and he did.
In a sentence, how I rate the performances so far, so good. He made it through it, and I thought that he would, but moving forward, I would like to see additions to the corner. I would like to see a training team that is more used to training world champions. I think that Richard needs that.
Definitely some good raw ingredients, good raw materials in Richard Torrez, an exciting young heavyweight with a lot of personality. He's got a good air about him.
The mustache is a nice touch. He's like Tom Selleck on steroids.
Congratulations to him.
Elsewhere in the heavyweight division, we saw Philippe Hrgovic take on Joyce in what was an entertaining fight, and the prediction stuck. Philippe Hrgovic won the fight.
All the predictions stuck. I went with Timmy to beat Joey. I went with Richard to beat Guido. I went with Philippe to beat Joe.
And he did. Both boys got off to a fast start in the first half of the fight. Both boys were letting punches go, punches flow. But in the second half, you saw Philippe Hrgovic start to slow down and take a more methodical approach. He spent a lot of time with his back on the ropes in the second half of the fight as Joyce was coming on, throwing punches in bunches, though not necessarily landing them. It was an activity versus accuracy kind of deal, to where Joyce was the noticeably more active fighter round by round, but not the more effective fighter, as Philippe Hrgovic bounced right hands off his head with some regularity at the start of the fight, in the middle, and towards the end. The right hand was a punch that was quite effective for Philippe.
There was a question ahead of this fight. as to whether or not Joe Joyce is a shot fighter. Does he have any punch resistance left?
And he put at least some on display yesterday as Philippe bounced right hand after right hand after right hand on his head. And Joe, surprisingly, took the punch as well. I think it's a combination of things, really. I think that Philippe is not the most concussive puncher in the heavyweight division, which is at least in part why Joe was able to take so many right hands from him.
There's no snap on those punches.
We saw the same thing in the Daniel Dubois fight, where Philippe started off the fight landing a lot of right hands on Daniel, and Daniel was able to take those right hands. Joe was able to take those right hands, likely because there's no snap on the punches. Philippe ain't the fastest fighter. I mean, I know that Joe is slow, but so is Philippe.
And as the fight progressed and Philippe started to slow down, focus more on countering and accuracy, and Joe was coming on, seemingly picking up the pace.
What does it say that Derek Chisora, who's got losses in the double digits, was able to knock down Joe Joyce where Philippe Hrgovic could not? It's because he ain't got no snap on the jab, no snap on the backhand, no snap in the punches.
Things getting chippy mid-range to inside between the fighters, men this size. You can't expect them to be all that graceful. What did Joe weigh? 274, 275?
A lot of wrestling, a lot of leaning on each other, stuff like that. I was surprised to see that Abel Sanchez had come out of retirement. I wasn't aware that he was still training fighters. The last I heard, he closed his gym at Big Bear Lake.
Apparently, he prepared Philippe Hrgovic for this fight to get him back in the winner's bracket and win a lesser version of a WBO title. We all know who's got the full one. Usyk's got the full title. Joseph Parker's got the interim.
What Philippe Hrgovic won yesterday was an international version of the title, but still a step in the direction of Joseph Parker, I would say, more than Alexander Usyk, since we all know Usyk's career is winding down and he's only got maybe 1 or 2 more fights left in him. It's conceivable that by the time he retires, Joseph Parker may be elevated to WBO champion, and if he is, Philippe is going in his direction.
That is, unless Joseph Parker and Alexander Usyk end up fighting.
There still is a question about that. In any event, Philippe Hrgovic seems to be going up the WBO route.
And Joe?
This is Joe Joyce's 4th recorded loss. 2 losses to Zhilei Zhang, 1 to Derek Chisora, and now 1 to Philippe Hrgovic after the fight. He said he's not retiring. He's going to keep going. So he's entering into the realm of gatekeeper, where he's good enough to test guys and make them work for the win, but perhaps not good enough to win himself.
So you could probably do Joe Joyce versus Frazier Clark, or Joe Joyce versus Fabio Wortley, Joe Joyce versus David Adilier.
The winner of Johnny Fisher versus Dave Allen, too. You can still do those kinds of fights for Joe, but as far as his time at the top and being a world title challenger, I think those days are over.
I don't think Joe's going to become a heavyweight champion.
Joe showed some durability yesterday and some ability yesterday to stay in character and keep the pressure on. Maybe he's not as shot as we all initially anticipated. He has a little bit more to give, just not enough that I think he will ever win a full world title. Though still, an entertaining fight from an entertaining guy.
And not bad from Philippe Hrgovic. Not great either, but he's back in the winner's bracket. He's going up the WBO route, and let's see what fights that leads him to.